My name is Sean Kenney, and we are here today for the virtual SMB Summit. And the purpose of this presentation is about project reviews. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the presentation, doing a screen share here. And we will take it away. As I said, hello, my name is Sean Kenney. Project reviews. Were your results achieved? This is part of the virtual SMB Summit, and look forward to sharing these ideas, concepts, and experience with you. And hopefully you'll be able to get some useful tips and tricks out of here. The way that we've broken up the presentation is to focus on 6 different areas. As you see, the areas are around goals, areas of focus, communication plans, team makeup, tools, and of course, the most important part is to celebrate. So why we are here. I like to start with quotes. As said by Lewis Carroll, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Or whether you believe that the comment came from Dr. Deming or Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you don't measure. So around those areas, we really need to make sure that we have artifacts, we have data that provides us with points from each point of the project for an overall successful result in the end. When I talk about project reviews, they're not just a one-time occurrence. A project review is done before, during, and after the project. That could be an office move, it could be a digital transformation, or anything in between. We want to make sure that there's traceability. What your vision was at the inception of the project needs to coincide with what your measurable deliverables are on the end, making sure that Part A rolls into Part B, into Part C, and D. So making sure there's traceability at each phase. From a software perspective, you're looking at what would be a project charter, from a project charter to requirements, if it's waterfall, requirements into design, design into a detailed design, build, test, system integration test, user acceptance training, and then, of course, implementation and support from there. If it's waterfall, you're going to, if it's agile, you're going to see more of is your release plan consistent? Are you progressing towards an overall set of measurable deliverables at the end, whether that be at the epic feature user story level or as it progresses from sprint 1 to sprint X. Much the same as the military, I'm a big fan of checklists, making sure not that this is the first time something is being done, but as you get into it, you have, here's the list of things that I need to make sure are accomplished, whether those be whether that be documentation or scheduled meetings, readouts, things of that nature. And then making sure we're not waiting till the end to say what was good, what worked, what didn't work, but we are consistently applying what those lessons learned are, and they're shared throughout the company, throughout the duration as appropriate. From a best practice perspective, there's certainly different areas where we need to focus on, but I try and lead with a little humor here. Document. Okay, what does that mean? We need to document. That doesn't mean 50, 100, 300 page documents. That means make sure there is documentation, there is an artifact, and there is confirmation of that artifact. As I'm sure you've heard before, you've maybe even said, just because somebody said it doesn't make it so. Make sure if there's a conversation, the conversation is documented, send it out in any kind of collaboration tool, email, text, some sort, so that there is confirmation. Yes, it was said, captured, and agreed to. The same with communication. Make sure that you communicate, up, down, over, and through. There is not a one size fits all when it comes to communication. Depending upon your organization and your teams, make sure that you are being cognizant and communicating at various points within the project, not just, okay, I communicated to the leader, to the CEO, to the champion, but rather people up, down, and around the organization, so that you are building excitement, knowledge, and understanding of what the outcome is going to be. As such, make sure you're engaging all of the personnel, the executive team, not just the people you're working with hand in hand, but rather those who are impacted stakeholders in the project. And they're going to want to understand a little differently what's going on in the project, not necessarily nuts and bolts details of how something is built or how something is going to operate at a detail or technical level, but rather what is the business outcome, how is that going to be measured. And as such, make sure there is a plan. You plan the work and you work the plan. As I've read many times, as my project teams have heard me say, hope is not a strategy. We can't hope it's going to work. We need to put together a plan. You're always going to be smarter tomorrow than you were yesterday. As such, make sure that you have a plan. The plan is communicated, understood, and then you're revising it. It is like all battle plans. They are out of date the moment they make contact with air, but make sure you have a structure and then work through that to continue to revise that and adapt to what is needed from the business, from the project team as time goes. As such, tracking and controlling. These are pieces and parts that are critical to overall project success. And from a project review perspective, make sure that you're talking through those things. As I said, you're going to be smarter tomorrow than you were yesterday. However, every idea is not a great idea. And just because somebody says it doesn't make it so, in that it needs to be in scope. Put a pin in it, put it in the parking lot, come back to it, whether that be in a retrospective or at a phase gate. And then we talk about project approaches. If we can't measure it, we can't manage it, as we saw in the first slide. So making sure that the things that you're measuring are value-added items. The last thing you want to do is make sure that you're measuring something which does not have significance to the overall project or program and doesn't have business value. Just because you're measuring it doesn't make it important. However, you can't just say that things are going to work out. So you do need to make sure that you have those measures in place. Along those lines, make sure you're striking the balance between the art and science. There needs to be a certain balance between fact and feeling. This one is especially important. Earlier in my career, I was very black and white. If it was in a specification, then that's the way it needed to be done. So here's what the requirement is, and that requirement can be satisfied. However, a technical team member or a consultant saw fit. Incorrect. Thinking through the question behind the question, what's trying to be accomplished here? You could be 100% compliant with what is documented, so it is factually accurate. However, you need to understand the question behind the question. What is needed? Why are we implementing this piece of business logic, code, this change? Make sure that there's understanding, not just, okay, we have something documented and we can go ahead and execute on that. The last thing that we ever want to do from a project perspective is say, oh, well, it's either working as designed or in the statement of work, in the scope document, it says. Those are adversarial, confrontational comments. We want to say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And from that, get to what the overall solution is. Best practice from a project approach, make sure there's traceability. Depending upon what methodology you're using, it could be a document at each stage, whether that be a vision document, scope document, into a requirements design, or it could be making sure that there is a vision captured, whether the tool be DevOps, Jira, otherwise, making sure that you have what are we trying to accomplish, and then what are the pieces and parts that are going to get us there. And then once you are comfortable, confident that those pieces and parts can get you to have clarity around what project success looks like, make sure you are relentless in that repeatability. Striking the balance of facts and feelings, as I said a little earlier, make sure you're focusing on what and how, not who. That can be a critical breakdown in projects and in reviews. Well, who did this? Who wasn't doing their job? Let's focus on fact-based. What's the problem? How are we going to get it resolved? Or how do we fix it from here? How can we bring more resources to bear? Focus on what and how, not who. And then now, as we start to break down what goes into the project and how that is going to be handled in project reviews, make sure that there's clarity. Some of this is certainly prep work for what is in the project review. As a group, were the goals clear? Were they clear from a business perspective, from a marketing perspective? Who is setting the path around development goals? And what is the definition of done? As such, how can planning be improved? Having one meeting to say, here's what we're going to do, everybody goes away and comes back at the end of the timeline and say, where are we? Let's be very conscious and cognizant of when we're going through the planning process. It is something that is not a one-time occurrence. It needs to be continually reviewed, refined. You've heard me say it before, you'll hear me say again, just because it's said doesn't necessarily make it so. We're going to be smarter today than we were yesterday. So making sure you're going through those planning stages and refining along the way, and not just saying, as of day one, nothing is going to change from here. Now, from a resourcing perspective, anybody who's familiar with project management is going to talk about the triple constraint: time, resources, and functionality. Well, resources can be different things depending upon the project. Resources could be dollars, resources could be people, resources could be machines. So how can we improve what our methodology is for resource planning? Is it as simple as a napkin, as complex as a resourcing system, or is it somewhere in between? Let's make sure that we're aligning those resources to what project success is, and not just saying, okay, we have this amount of work and we'll just figure it out as we go. Hope is not a strategy. As such, were the resources assigned to the project the right amount of resources? You can't take 9 women in 1 month and make a baby. The same is true here. Not only did you have enough resources, were they the right resources? One challenge that I've had consistently is when people talk about availability. Oh, we have this person available. Availability is not a skill set we're looking to satisfy our staff on. We want to make sure we have the right resources with the right skills at the right time. And we can ramp up what our velocity is based on having those right resources. Just because somebody is available doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be able to work any faster, be any more productive. As such, just because somebody's on a sheet or a list doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to operate at the level of efficiency there that is needed in order for us to have project success. So have a critical eye on Are you burning out your resources? Are people burning their load ends across multiple projects, initiatives? Or if it's an internal project, are you expecting somebody to deliver 100% of utilization against an internal project, as well as what their regular job is? That is something that we find often when people have to wear multiple different hats. They can do a lot of things poorly or a couple of things very well. Just make sure that we're prioritizing and not overloading or overburdening those resources. Also, the balance of what their regular full-time job is and what their project responsibilities are. Make sure that there's clarity. Here's what the utilization or what your focus is supposed to be in a percentage or in a day breakdown, and from there come back and revisit it often. Around project management and scheduling, much the same as what we were talking about in the two previous slides, is the schedule realistic? Just because you can put it on a calendar and say, if this happens, then that happens, and by the end of month X, everything should be done. From a project management perspective, there is no soft language that is acceptable. Should, could, might, or if everything lines up are the biggest red flags and bells that go off. You can't plan an initiative with everything working out. At the same time, it doesn't mean turn that all the way over to everything needs to have 100% contingency. Make sure that the schedule is realistic with some assumptions. Make sure that you're documenting what are the risk factors. From a risk factor, what is the probability? What is the impact? It'll create a very nice and clear heat map to see where you're operating and where that falls. Probability and impact is going to say, okay, am I low probability and a low impact if that happens? That's in the green zone. If you have high probability, high impact, flaming red, that's where you really want to get a very clear, concise mitigation plan or contingency plan. As we move through the life cycle of the project, development, design, specifications. When we talk about the functional piece, from a business perspective, is there clarity on who is defining how the business wants to operate, how the system, what the tools that are going to be put in place are? If there are issues there, it needs to be identified early and then mitigated and addressed, not just, oh, well, that's the way this person is. Make sure that there is a high level of personal ownership for what the requirements is, what the business results are going to be. Things are going to be better, not panacea. Things are going to be better when the owner of the design buys into, let's make it the best it can be, and then do CI or continuous improvement. And then as we talk about functional to architectural or technical, back to, are we looking to solve only this problem, or are we taking a larger scalability focus on what the design is going to be? Who owns that? Because there's product or project focus, then there's program and enterprise. So who's looking at it from a scalability perspective? It may satisfy this one need as it relates to the project, but let's take a step back or a higher look and make sure that there's consistency and scalability capability for the architectural design. And then as we're working on specification and code components and building those features and functions, make sure that there is a measure in there for consistent success and growth. And everybody's favorite, oftentimes in projects, testing and training get pushed to the end, shortened, or pushed to the side. And this is really where we need to focus on, are there or were there issues in test planning or execution? This is either in the step or stage right before you go into final testing or cutover, or as a after project review, post-mortem, project closure, to say, did we cut that short? Did we not plan it for long enough? Or were the plans following a design that said there weren't going to be any issues, remediation? People are going to be smarter tomorrow than they were yesterday. As the project team or business users go through the project, there are going to be things that they think of. From a testing perspective, are there tests that are validating or invalidating those assumptions or presumptions? Or is that adding to the list or the roadmap of how improvements are going to be made in the future? There's a difference between a bug or a defect and additional functionality. So back to resources, were there enough testers? Were those testers skilled in what the business needs were, what the business process was, or was there clear documentation in order for them to successfully execute those tests? And did the output of testing provide an approval for shipping of a product? Shipping not necessarily being packaged and shipped out the door, but rather, is it production ready? Can it be used by the business? And project team, both technical, functional, and business, was there a good working relationship with the testers? Were we focused on the result as opposed to the documentation, the test scripts, the functional requirements? As you see, there's a common theme here: traceability. Are the test scripts that are being used by the testers matching up, checking off features or functions that have been identified in each previous step? And there is where we talk about product. From a product perspective, we're really looking at how are we enhancing? Is there tools that we're using? Are we applying lessons learned as we move along? As such, with applying those lessons learned, are we continually improving, increasing skill sets, and making sure that we don't run into this again? The idea of replowing tilled earth is one that is painful and expensive, and from a project success perspective, can really chip away at the morale of the team. So with high morale and continually applying lessons learned, there should be more and more satisfaction with the product that is being prepared and shipped, moved into QA, UAT, or production. And then for continuous improvement, how would you make it better? How would you make sure that lessons learned are being applied? Are you inserting a pause to say, is the output consistent with what our business needs are? And have we modified our vision from product vision through development test now into ready for shipment or productionalization? One thing that, as we transition from the different stages within the project, to talk about is the communication plan. The communication plan is not a binder. The communication plan is not, I sent out an email to people to say, we're working on a project. Making sure that the communication plan has multiple touch points, you're communicating up, down, and throughout the organization with different modes, methods, and tools, whether that be tabletops within the cafeteria or one of the coffee rooms, or if it is quick reference guides that are being emailed, posters that are in the walkways and by the stairs. making sure that there's clarity around what the communication plan is, so that when the project gets to the point where testing and training are occurring, those that haven't been involved are familiar, not experts, familiar with what the need and the results of the project are going to be. People are going to be much more concerned and focused on what the benefit is than the actual details of how we got to where we are. As such, making sure that we have project team communications, corporate communications, and there are, I know this is going to shock you, there are times when information gets siloed. Well, I didn't think, you will often hear somebody say, well, I didn't think so-and-so needed to know about this, or didn't think it was going to impact them. Making sure that we're effectively communicating across our individual parts of the project are as important as making sure there's an overall communication strategy and plan to get data and information out to the end user. And that's very different from making sure there's execution of a project plan and a status report, but rather overall program management and clarity for disseminating, sharing, and distributing that information. There's always going to be problems, issues, opportunities within our engagement. So making sure that there is the right level of hierarchy escalation that's available. Project team members to team leads, to project leads or project managers, all the way up to the program manager, looking across and saying, here's how this is going to impact our overall engagements or set of engagements. And as I mentioned a little earlier, the communication plan is not just a project plan and a status report, but making sure the status report does provide a vision to what the overall health is, whether that is red, yellow, green, or red, amber, green, and then having definitions around what causes something to be in yellow or red. Again, words can mean different things to different people, making sure that there's a glossary and a common understanding of what that can be. You've heard me talk about different teams previously, so making sure who's doing what, when, and who's responsible is a tremendous asset from a project review to make sure you're going to the right person. I've introduced myself throughout my career as the one throat to choke and the one neck to hug. If there are problems, I say it's me. It's my responsibility to make sure that they get fixed. If everything's going peachy keen, then that's because the team members are doing a great job. And just making sure the customer, the client, the executive know, who do I go to when there's a problem? Trying to make sure that there's awareness on how they navigate the project organization is not of value or benefit to the project executives or the client. So make sure that there's a or a couple of people that they go to if there's an issue, and making sure that there's the ability for that team, that leadership, that management team to work to effectively resolve, mitigate issues as they come up. And then project team staff management. Project managers, program managers have different responsibilities, capabilities, and it can't be done alone. So making sure that the manager, your manager, is helping you be successful, so that there is the team concept of getting things done together, as opposed to not my job, somebody else will take care of it. Make sure to utilize what kind of support you have from a leadership or management perspective, and then making sure that there's clarity to the project team and to management that they are a useful, valuable team member in establishing project success. There are, of course, competing priorities. our project or a project initiative within the organization is not the only one. So let's make sure that there's clarity from a project team member perspective on the impact of certain business decisions that management disseminates and how that impacts the project. The ocean does not need to be boiled here. Make sure that there is clarity. This is what the decision is, and here's what our perceived impact is. Make sure the team members are on board with that. So if there are issues, risks that come up, that they're raised and it doesn't just fester and time goes by and all of a sudden the inevitable, well, I knew that was going to be an issue. Doesn't help the project, doesn't help us move forward. And then as such, if there are external dependencies, make sure that there's clarity to the project team, to the leadership on what that means, whether that be resourcing, dollar, credit, or as we have here with COVID-19, the ability for us to travel and work with team members in a room, or is there the capability to utilize video technology to feel like you're in the same room? We're almost to the end here, but wanted to make sure that there are a common understanding and use of what tools are in place, how are we tracking bugs from a technical perspective, if we are creating builds of feature functionality around technology, are those manual, are those automated? Do we have the tools, personnel in order to do that in a beneficial way? And are we collaborating well from a documentation standards perspective, as well as code standards, right? So when we think of tools, what other tools are needed? It's great to say at the end of the project, life would be so much easier, or would have been so much easier if we had these tools. Alternatively, take the lessons learned throughout the project or through previous projects and put together a tools and practice page for what will help us be successful in our next program, project, initiative. And then when everything is to the point of we've reviewed multiple times, we've gone live, we've stabilized, now what do? Well, you celebrate getting better. I've recently read Simon Sinek's book, which talks about the infinite game. Having a finite mindset is going to say, I want to be the best, I want to win. It's zero sum, which means there's winners and losers. You can be the best. Well, there's only one best. So getting better is really a mindset of how are you making improvements? How are you getting better that are playing into the long-term or the infinite game for success? So make sure that you celebrate getting to the point that you are from your project, your program, your initiative. Talk about the 3 things in order of importance that went well. Also, what needs improvement? How can it be better? I had somebody on a project team that ran an improv studio, and they said, instead of talking about being binary and saying, no, you can't do this, or no, it wasn't good for these reasons, going with the yes and. We're through it. This would be even better if. And just framing it that way means that you can take the improvements, take the lessons learned, and do it even better, and not have the same stumbles that you have previously. And then, based on what we've been through, what we've collectively accomplished, what other issues can be mitigated in the next engagement? How can we do things more, better, differently, so that we're not starting with a blank piece of paper? The wheel is round. Let's make sure that we're doing things the right way and learning, applying those learnings to future projects and engagements. I appreciate the time and attention you have shared today. If there are questions, comments, or concerns, happy get that feedback, and I'm sure there'll be a questionnaire, and the virtual SMB Summit team will get that back to me. I'd be happy to respond. Thank you again for your time. Again, Sean Kenney, appreciate you being with me today.